Testing 1 2. Testing 1 2. Good. I'll speak loud. I'll speak louder.
Is Bill there?
Bill is here. Pinkish shirt.
Oh, right, yeah.
See Heather slides. Hi, everybody. Maybe we will get started. Welcome to our public forum that will examine the impact of major industrial developments on rural communities. My name is Mike Clare. I'm the Associate Director for Public Policy at Memorial University's Leslie Harris Center of Regional Policy and Development, and I'm delighted to be your host here today. And I want to welcome those of you who are here with me in the Arts Center, the beautiful Placentia Bay Arts Center in the community of Placentia, as well as those of you who are watching on the internet. Welcome to everybody. Most small rural communities would love to have a major industrial development in their backyards. Such a development would mean an influx of young families, a greater tax base, and a more sustainable future. But be careful what you ask for, because with the good comes many challenges. Many of the large industrial developments in this province are undertaken by major international corporations that have staffs of experts in the law, human resources, environment, and all these other things. And whether they want to or not, their relationship to a rural community is one of Goliath to David. The government of Newfoundland is helpful. They help negotiate benefits agreements with these multinational corporations, and that goes a long way to making sure that the people of this province gain the benefits, be it or whatever. But rural communities, when a major industrial development comes to your town, it brings with it many demands and pressures that at the municipal level. There's pressure on housing and on affordable housing, on water and sewer lines and on treatment plants, on roads and bridges, on recreational facilities, etc., etc. Now, perversely, the provincial government kind of ignores communities with major developments because these communities are taken care of. They got a major industrial development. We can wipe our hands clean and work on those communities that need more of our help. But a lot of times, these industrial projects create problems for municipal governments. Now, fortunately, some regions of the province and in other places have looked at this situation and have created or identified new ways of making sure that the benefits of development flow all the way through to regions and municipalities, and not just at the provincial level. So we've got three speakers today who are going to look at this situation from varying perspectives. One is going to look at what the role of the province is and how benefits agreements are negotiated, and what's involved with those agreements. Our second speaker is going to look at other regions in the country, other regions in this province, where we are looking at new ways of financing making sure that local and regional authorities have the resources that they need to meet the demands that they have, that are facing them. And our third speaker is going to be the mayor of Placentia, which is on the front lines of dealing with these major international corporations. So we're going to have a fantastic session here today. And just to recap, we're going to start with 3 presentations, and then we're going to have a Q&A with the audience. And for those of you who are in the room here with me, we are going to circulate a wireless microphone so that the people who are watching on the internet can hear your question or your comment. And for those who are watching on the internet, there you will see a text box, I think at the lower left-hand corner of your screen. You can enter your question or comment there, and we will read it out here for the audience to hear and for the panelists to address. We're recording this session, and we will upload the session to the Harris Center's website within a day or so. And so if you want to see it again, if you want to see the brilliant question that you asked, you can go onto our website and watch it. Or if you want to refer it to friends or colleagues, you'll have a chance to do so as well. A session like today's doesn't happen without the help of an awful lot of people, and actually they're too numerous for me to mention right now, but they will be listed in the credit when we upload the video to our website. These people will be identified in the credits. So without further ado, let's turn to our presenters. You have been handed a program, I think, in your kits here today. And for those of you who are watching on the internet, you can download the program from the website. It lists the biographies of these people in more detail, so I won't spend too much time reading them out. I'll just give you the essentials right now. Our first speaker is going to be Mark Shrimpton. Mark is Senior Associate with Stantec Consulting based in St. John's. He has over 30 years experience assessing, planning, and managing the socioeconomic impacts of resource development projects. He has played a lead role in preparing requirement studies, impact assessments, and benefit plans for major projects in the petroleum, mining, and hydroelectric industries. Mark has worked on projects across Canada as well as in the US, Iceland, Greenland, the UK, France, Switzerland, the Falkland Islands, and Australia. So this is a man who is much in demand around the world. Our second speaker is going to be Dr. Heather Hall. Heather is a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Geography and at the Leslie Harris Center of Regional Policy and Development at Memorial University in St. John's. Her research interests focus on regional planning and regional development in Northern Ontario and in Newfoundland and Labrador. She's currently working on a research project that looks at labor-related mobility in this province. And our third and final speaker is going to be Bill Hogan, Mayor of Placentia. He was in the first cohort of workers that developed the iron ore mines of Labrador in 1962. He moved to what is now Placentia in 1968 to work for Urco Industries and has been here ever since. He has over 50 years experience in the health and safety field in heavy industry. He has served for over 30 years in provincial and municipal government, including 20 years as the mayor of Dunnville, 12 years as the mayor of Placentia, and 4 years as a cabinet minister in the government of Clyde Wells. So I think that you will agree with me that we have 3 very eminent speakers who will help us figure out how we are to deal with major industrial developments in a rural area. I should say that the Q&A session is going to be moderated by my colleague, Dr. Rob Greenwood, the Executive Director of the Office of Public Engagement and the Harris Center at Memorial University. And so after these presenters have spoken, Rob will come to the microphone and moderate the Q&A session. So without further ado, please welcome our 3 presenters, and please welcome Mark Shrimpton to the podium.
Good to go? We're good to go. Thank you very much indeed, Mike. Thank you very much indeed, the Harris Center, for the opportunity to speak here today. Thank you for being here, all of you, both in the room and there. Opportunity from mega projects. I was approached by Mike, would I speak on this topic? And I have to say this was something of a challenge, because pathetic though it may seem, life. Explain that many years ago, and we won't go into that, I was the newly appointed research director for the city of St. John's at the time the Hibernia discovery was made. I was newly appointed research director because I knew about things like municipal residential parking schemes and urban planning related issues, and I knew absolutely nothing about the oil industry. I had a vague sense that something was happening off the coast, but I was a research director, so I had to get on that plane to Aberdeen and Stavanger and find out about this industry and how we might benefit from it and how we might manage its impacts. And basically I've been doing that ever since, one way or another, to my great good fortune, I have to say. I'm somebody I very much fell on my feet, and it's delightful to be talking about this interest of mine, as well as essentially research which I pursued through my career today. What to say about that topic, though? And I thought about it for a fair bit, and decided that perhaps it would be best, in the context of today's talk, if I briefly reviewed what we have seen in this province as a whole to date, as a result of the offshore oil industry and other major projects. I think at the end of the day, it is a remarkable economic development success story, which is, of course, not to say that everything went according to plan, not to say that everything is right with the world, but be that as it may, I think, and various people who visit this province from other parts of the world go, wow, this is impressive. So let's have a look at that. Let's applaud the successes we have made, but let's also have a look at some of the challenges. Specifically in terms of challenges, I'll then talk about the place of benefits planning in making all this happen, how it works, but then some of the limitations and challenges of benefits planning as it happens in this place. I won't be getting into the nuts and bolts of benefits planning and what specific businesses should do or what communities should do, but I hope it will stimulate that discussion from other panel members and this afternoon. Lastly, I want to describe also some past successes in the case of community effects management, in terms of managing the social effects of these projects. I think there have been some notable past successes, but again, there are some challenges, and I think perhaps there has been some complacency around this issue, so I will talk about that in some detail. The success story. I'm involved in a number of conferences where people come to St. John's from other parts of the world to learn about the oil industry. Most recently, actually, one on Arctic oil and gas. It was an Arctic oil and gas conference in St. John's. People coming from all over the world, enjoying being in St. John's, a clearly very prosperous city, a very cosmopolitan city, and this is one of the slides I used in my presentation, and people don't recognize those first two bullets. They say, how can that be possible? This is such a thriving, such a good place to be. This is a place which has, as per my overview slide, has been transformed. I have seen that in my own time here in Newfoundland, arriving in 1971, and such things as, because I was becoming a graduate student at Memorial, having to have a chest x-ray because of the history of endemic tuberculosis. Going through the immigration process in London, and the immigration officer smiling all the time, ending up by saying, and now, Mr. Shrimpton, where do you want to go in Canada? And I said, Newfoundland. And he said, why on earth do you want to go there? Things have changed. It is a great success story, largely attributable, I believe, to the offshore oil activity and the decision of, in particular, credit to Brian Peckford to say, based on Norwegian experience, we need to leverage from this industry benefits for the people of this province. It's not that we haven't had lots of resources before, but it was a question of capturing the benefits from those resources. I mean, I think as again, somebody with an interest in economic development, I could look back over the last 120 years, and there are some books on this, and one could see a wide range of initiatives to try to do something about the economy, be it steel mills or railways or cucumber greenhouses. Well, something has succeeded, and it is the offshore oil industry and capturing benefits in the offshore oil industry. And I'm not going to go into the numbers because I don't think I need to go into numbers, because I'm sure everybody in this room and watching on the webcast is familiar with the changes that we have seen, but substantial economic benefits in terms of employment, contracts, etc., etc. And anyway, at the end of the day, I don't think it's the numbers which are most important. It is things like the investments in infrastructure, over $1 billion worth of infrastructure investment by the industry alone, education and training and what's going on in that world, and I think of co-op students and indeed people who are in this room today who are at Memorial in part thanks to programs funded by industry, the chairs there, research and development and the exciting things which are happening in that field thanks to benefits plan required expenditures, and the changes that have come to the business community. And again, I'm still talking about the province in the broad terms. New equipment, expertise, increased business, improved business systems, greater concern with quality, safety, etc., greater entrepreneurship. I think about the CAL group of companies, or my favorite, Provincial Aerospace, which I recently did a case study of them, and they say absolutely we are what we are now as a result of the oil industry. Well, what are they now? Well, they're not the 10-person flight training school that they were originally in the 1970s. They employ over 900 people and have business in 30 countries all over the world, and they're headquartered on the general aviation side of the airport out in St. John's. Great success stories. So they have gone out, they have got this work in the oil industry locally, in the oil industry elsewhere, in other industries applying their capabilities, both locally and in other parts of the world. So no longer a have-not province. We have to make fiscal donations to those poor benighted souls in Ontario. One of Canada's fastest growing economies. I really do think this is, and I'm not alone in thinking this is a remarkable example of transformative change and of diversification. It's not just that the oil industry is an add-on, but that it has generated new capabilities applicable in other industries. I still believe that were the oil industry to be stricken from the face of the earth tomorrow, there would still be an awful lot of benefit left in this place by new capabilities applied to other industries. This really is sustainable economic and social development. Again, I'm not saying perfection, but I think we should recognize the overall success, and which has had effects in this part of the world, directly or indirectly. And I thought it was interesting to look at the lists of projects which have affected or are within the boundaries of this area, a significant number of them. I was thinking earlier when presentation about, of course, I didn't include the American base here, you know, perhaps the original mega project here, which unfortunately went ahead without any environmental assessment or benefits planning. Lots of consulting opportunities were sadly missed. But I think it would be very interesting to document that whole process in terms of economic development. It certainly had substantial positive, but also I understand negative effects. So lots of projects. You'll notice on this slide a few asterisks, and that comes back to a question which was asked this morning. I think it is important to make a distinction between those projects which are essentially construction projects, we build the thing and it floats away, and projects which result in longer term employment, such as the refinery up on the isthmus, to a lesser degree the transshipment terminal, the ERCO plant while it was there, now Vale. I also flagged there, of course, northern Alberta, because there are major projects here which I'm sure are having major effects throughout rural Newfoundland. I think we're all aware of that. So there are boundaries of geography, but they're perhaps not limitations. So how did we get there? And I want to say a few words about benefits planning in Newfoundland and Labrador, especially because I want to, thus far I've been talking about generally the effects on the province as a whole. But clearly, for this meeting today, focus on what about this area? So there are a few things which I think can be said. First of all, just a little definitional thing, talking about benefits planning. What do I mean by benefits planning? Benefits planning is concerned with delivering industrial benefits to jurisdictions, communities, social groups, but it's based primarily on project expenditures which need to happen anyway. So not talking about the taxes and royalties, which can be very beneficial and very significant. Not talking about equity participation, which is quite commonly the case with communities in areas where there are Aboriginal land claims. Not talking at this time about community contributions. It would be nice to fund a hospital or a health centre or a school or whatever. And what we're talking about is something which is actually usually a regulatory requirement, although I'm certainly familiar with cases where the proponents of projects have said, yeah, this would be a good thing to do, let's do it as a voluntary act. In this place, where, again, given the historical state of the economy, Peckford's initiative, there was a real drive to capture these benefits and hence get into benefits planning, in a way which is not common across Canada or indeed around the world. I think we truly do have some world-class expertise in the area of benefits planning. We've learned from getting things wrong. I'm sure we'll do other things wrong in the future, but we really have learned a lot. Benefits planning is a requirement. In the offshore, the Atlantic Accord says if you want to develop a field, you've got to submit all these regulatory documents, but in particular, a benefits plan. It is the one most important regulatory document, according to the Atlantic Accord. Onshore, there is no formal requirement along those lines, but what the province has done, recognizing the success of the Atlantic Accord benefits planning process, is to say, as part of the environmental assessment review, oh, and by the way, if you're going to be cleared from the environmental assessment review, you are going to have to submit a satisfactory benefits plan, and often there's also a requirement for a diversity plan or women's employment plan. So there's a regulatory process driver here which causes this to happen. Just as a sidelight, there are also often benefits agreements, a contractual arrangement, and the province has increasingly required those. But the thing was driven by the Atlantic Accord process, and there is now a increasing provincial driver to make this happen. The plans apply to construction and operations, and hence the distinction previously made in terms of little asterisks on an earlier slide. Because of the difference, and again, I don't think I need to speak to it because there was discussion of this morning, construction is of short-term, highly variable labour and business requirements, complications associated with dealing with construction contractors rather than the people who own and run the plant, as in the case of, for instance, Vale, and construction unions and their hiring processes play key roles in all of that. They present a series of challenges. I think it's interesting to look back, and the original hopes for the Bull Arm site for Hibernia, there was in early provincial legislation, based on having looked at rates of development in North Sea, that we should only allow one oil field to develop every 3 years, so that Bull Arm could essentially churn out these platforms like a manufacturing line. Well, it didn't work that way, and I'm not convinced that the same that it will happen with wellhead platforms if Husky does go down that road with the White Rose Extension project. But there are certainly challenges associated with construction projects. Operations clearly present much greater long-term opportunities. They justify companies investing, they justify individuals investing in education and training. It's not a job, it's a career. And as was said earlier, in terms of to a couple of generations. What do benefits plans do? They look at employment and training, the obvious one, supply development and procurement, local companies getting involved, research and development, diversity. There are often targets associated in terms of you've got to produce this number of jobs, you've got to seek to produce this number of jobs and this percentage of business going to the province. Because for offshore projects, certainly local usually means provincial. And those plans heretofore have been entirely concerned with provincial capture of benefits. For onshore projects, ones through the provincial system, the EA guidelines often in the past have made no reference to regional benefits or local benefits, although increasingly they do. So for instance, a few recent projects in Labrador have said, yes, we want to know about what's coming to the province, but also what's coming to Labrador, and in one case to Western Labrador. Also in Labrador, it's common for there to be requirements with respect to local employment and business for Aboriginal groups, sometimes implemented through the IBA. But there is an increasing recognition by industry, and I think also by government, to at least consider this issue, recognizing that it is an issue which is raised in public consultation processes, etc., etc. And I think that's just reflected in the Hebron Benefits Plan, which is the most recent offshore oil benefits plan, just came out last year. And I think it's worth just spending 5 minutes looking at that. Am I allowed 5 minutes, Mike? How am I doing? Good. The Hebron Benefits Plan starts off with 5 principles. And you see that the first of them, in fact, makes reference to local benefits commitments. Essentially, this first principle says that we're not going to in any way threaten the business fundamentals, you know, safety, environmental performance, efficiency, and integrity. That's absolutely crucial, but you know, we will seek to develop local benefits within that framework. But if we look at the second bullet, selecting contractors and suppliers who work diligently with us to deliver benefits to the people of the province. Again, it's the implication that we're talking about the provincial level there. But there is hope. Another principle, there are 5 in total, of which I'll discuss 4, promoting the development of local skills and industry capability that leaves a lasting legacy, which means to me sustainable benefit for the communities in which we operate and for the province. So at least they're sort of focusing in on places where they are doing stuff. Lastly, and I think this is in many ways the most interesting and important of the principles, working collaboratively with industry, government, academic and training institutions, community and other stakeholders for the effective delivery of benefits. Recognizing that oil companies are about doing offshore oil stuff, and economic development agencies and community groups and agencies are the people who know about their communities, their areas, and what needs be done. So I think this is an important one, and hopefully, and at this stage I should admit to have been involved in the drafting of the Hebron Benefits Plan, but I should also say that since it was finished, they've had nothing more to do with me. So I'm not sure what that says. But anyway, I think there's some wording here which is of significance to at least some people in this room and can perhaps be used to leverage good things. And indeed, the benefits plan goes into talk for the first time that I know in a benefits plan about such things as rural Newfoundland and Labrador. So in particular, discussion of promoting access to Hebron benefits opportunities in rural Newfoundland and Labrador, and also discussion of industrial tourism initiatives, both educate about the province and the province's offshore petroleum industry and contribute to local tourism. And there's specific discussion there which goes on to saying, you know, we're not just talking about a few site tours at the construction site, but a more permanent long-term possibility. So these are one of the things which were under consideration. I don't know its current status. The use of distance technologies to facilitate the access of rural businesses to the project and industry procurement-related events in St. John's. I mean, why is it that the Harris, well, actually, I can answer this question. It is the genius of the Harris Centre, plainly, and of course of the learned Dr. Greenwood, to cause events like this to be webcast. So anybody, anywhere in the province can learn about this. but in terms of most industry events, Neue workshops, etc., etc., they are not webcast, allowing easy access to people outside of St. John's. So support for that initiative, and encouraging, facilitating collaboration between the NOIA, the Industry Association, and other industry associations, and rural business and supplier groups. So definitely on the radar. So what, I'm skipping to the second topic there. So what do we make of this? At the very least, we make of this that there is some recognition of and initiatives towards delivering benefits at the regional or community level. Now, this is the plan, these are the words. What the specifics of what are happening here, I don't know with respect to Hebron. I'm certainly familiar with some of the things that are happening with some of the other projects, but there is this recognition which provides some opportunity to move forward on delivering local benefits.
Zero, Mark. Zero.
Zero. We're going to have the discussion later. No, I won't. I'll leave that until later. I do have a response. I'm certainly sympathetic to that position, but I think there's always a need to identify opportunities, put it that way. Let me say a few words about community effects planning. So this is the second and last section of the story. Proponents of major projects seek to mitigate adverse community effects. There's a requirement to do that within the socioeconomic impact assessment process. The proponents make a very clear distinction, on the whole, between benefits and community effects. They try to separate these totally, because their argument is, and I don't think it is unreasonable, that the provision of public infrastructure and services is a government responsibility, and this is, the need for this is recognized through the process of taxation. Again, we saw an earlier figure of $2.3 billion in one financial year going from the oil industry to the provincial exchequer. And their argument is, we're handing over all this money to you, the government, so that you, the government, can deliver services and infrastructure in just the same way as I too, and all of us, hand over our money and our taxes to the government to pay for the provision of, and they say, you know, that's how we make the contribution, plus we don't know what the priorities are. We don't know what the best way of addressing these things are. You know, that's the role of government. Here's the money, get on with it. I mean, it's over between 30 and 40% of provincial exchequer comes from the industry. It's play up to that. Now, that is not to say that there aren't community contributions and corporate social responsibility initiatives. It's not that the proponents are totally washing their hands of it, and those sorts of things do happen and have happened here in terms of investments by Vale, as I understand it. The school? Heather, you're the next presenter, aren't you? Let me also, speaking about success of an economic development initiative, I think we should also say something about the success of dealing with the local social effects of construction activity. And I'm thinking back here to Hibernia days, and I have a very clear memory of all the people coming home from Scotland and seeing the disastrous social effects of major construction projects in Scotland and saying, all hell is going to break loose here. Mike is saying 2 minutes. I think we can just about do that. But high technology flashes the thing, not those tacky cards. And there was very considerable fear, you're going to have to lock your doors, etc., etc. The response to that by Mobil was the use of a work camp and a strategy to insulate and isolate the workforce from other communities. And there was a memorial graduate student who did her master's dissertation by interviewing people in the community who documented how concerned people were about the Hibernia and the effects, negative social effects it would have, and then went back 6 months after the project started and then later, and the evidence was that these fears were not realized. Indeed, to a degree, people say, hardly know the project is there, because they were successful in keeping the workers in the camp until such a time as they went to their home communities. Not all the workers, there were some, of course, local communities. But that does have a downside in terms of, you're missing out on some local economic benefits in terms of the expenditures of workers. But I think overall, from a social planning perspective, very successful. However, I think that success was such that perhaps we, and by we, I'm talking about consultants, and I'm talking about companies and perhaps government, have got a little bit complacent about this, and maybe more than a little bit complacent about this. Certainly when the White Rose Project came along, there were some problems with housing and social problems in Marystown, and I am increasingly concerned by cases where there is a decision, given the very high costs of providing camp accommodations, there is a decision not to have a camp, or where there are payments which essentially encourage people to commute. I think I'm going to hang out with the sort of social impacts crowd this afternoon, not least because I have heard anecdotal stories about some of the social impacts of having construction workers living in communities. I have heard concerns about rental prices and things like that. So I think there is concern there. I think there is, or should be, considerable concern too about people commuting from St. John's. If you've got a 12-hour work day, you're driving from St. John's. Before that, you're driving all the way home to St. John's. After that, the weather in Newfoundland is sometimes not ideal. I think there are real safety concerns, and I'm not sure that enough attention is being paid to that. I am also concerned by the increased rhetoric or inclination towards having dry camps, by which I mean ones which do not, unlike the Hibernia camp, have a bar. That was part of the insulate, isolate strategy. Keep people in the camp because not least they can have a beer there or a glass of wine after work. If you have a dry camp, I think that's an incentive for people to get in a car and drive into a local community and have a few beers, and I think there are some social and safety concerns associated with that. So I've gone over my 2 minutes, but I'll just give you a quick conclusion, which is to a degree a repetition. I really do think, we have seen a remarkable economic development success story at the provincial level. And as I say, people are coming from various parts of the world to come and see this and see how it has happened. And I think there is increasing industry and government recognition of the regional benefits challenges, but then there are issues about how far there has been a response to that, or how one can further prompt that. In terms of community effects management, I do think what happened at the Hibernia construction project is in many ways best practice and is still reviewed as best practice, but I'm concerned that this early success has led to some complacency on the part of various people. Thank you very much indeed. I hope this will stimulate, I'm confident this will stimulate discussion, including from the audience and Heather and people online. Thank you very much indeed.
Perfect. So as has been mentioned a few times today, my name is Heather Hall, and I'm working with the Harris Center as well as the Department of Geography at Memorial University. I am a relative newcomer to Newfoundland and Labrador, arrived in September. I'm originally from Northern Ontario, and I don't know, Northern Ontario is much like Newfoundland and Labrador. I'm hoping I can convince you of that today. I was born in a mining town called Kirkland Lake, which was formerly known as the Mile of Gold because of all of the gold mines that were within the community. But I grew up in Sudbury, which at one time was known as the nickel capital of the world. Has close connections to Newfoundland and Labrador, with some of the same mining companies being involved both in Sudbury as well as in this region. My grandfather, he was involved in the mining industry, so is my father to this day. And so when I was asked to talk today about the challenges and the opportunities of mega projects, especially those related to natural resources, like Mark, I through many of them. And what I was asked to kind of bring to the discussion was a little bit of insight on those challenges and opportunities, which won't come as a surprise to anyone in this room, but then also in terms of my background for my research, which is regional development in natural resource-based regions. Some insights from other regions, and I was specifically asked to share some from the mainland of what's been happening in resource-based Newfoundland and Labrador that maybe we can get some insights from. So very briefly, in the 10 to 12 minutes that I have, are those growing pains and those growing gains that we have confronting us related to mega projects. Then we'll get into some examples of regional development initiatives that have occurred elsewhere in terms of trying to take advantage of those opportunities and mitigate those challenges. And then finally, I'm going to spend just a minute or so discussing a new research initiative that I'll be starting in September that's looking at labor mobility in the mining and mineral processing industries here in Newfoundland and Labrador and in Northern Ontario. So on this slide, what I did was just kind of think of a lot of the challenges that often come up, both in the literature, but also in communities, surrounding mega projects and natural resources. And what we see are no surprises, I'm sure, things like affordability, lack of local control, infrastructure constraints, labor supply availability, work camps Mark was just talking about, the social impacts, the environmental impacts. But what I really want to kind of zero in on two major themes or two major challenges that I see that are especially important are labor issues and the staples trap. So in terms of some of the labor challenges that we're seeing, and I grabbed some headlines that pertain to Newfoundland and Labrador that capture these issues. And the first one is a recent one from June 4th. Newfoundland and Labrador mega projects dominate Atlantic Canada. And basically what this article was discussing was a recent APEC event where they talked about recent stats has 113 projects totaling $54 billion in Newfoundland and Labrador alone. So that's a lot of mega projects and a lot of investment and a lot of development that's happening. And what we're also seeing and what I'm hearing around the province, I've had the opportunity to go to Lab West as well as many other communities, is that there's labor shortages. And this isn't just in the skilled trade, which often dominates the media, and we hear all about how we need more skilled trades. There is a shortage there, but it's also the service industries in a lot of these communities see the impacts as well. And when we've been up in Labrador West the last couple of months, we've been hearing about how the temporary foreign worker program essentially saved the service industry in that community. And so what we're really seeing are these labor shortages, which then feeds into labor mobility. And that's increasingly a challenge as people are commuting. Sometimes it's daily, sometimes it's weekly, maybe 2 on, 2 off. And they're coming from their home communities and going to their work communities. And this has a number of challenges associated with infrastructure. So whether the infrastructure that these communities have can support might be a strain on infrastructure that's already existing. It also raises concerns about taxation, as well as temporary housing and work camps that Mark previously discussed. Another challenge that I wanted to spend a bit of time kind of just discussing is what we often refer to in the research community as the staples trap. And this was a term that was coined by a Canadian scholar named Harold Innes. And what he was really trying to take into account is that export mentality that exists in Canada, that rip it out and ship it out mentality, to take our resources out without very little processing, lack of diversification, and ship them elsewhere. In Newfoundland and Labrador, you're doing a bit of a better job at requiring and combating this rip it out and ship it out mentality by requiring processing in the province. And a lot of other regions across the country are envious of that. Other major challenges that we see related to kind of the focus on natural resources as they relate to mega projects is that boom-bust economy. So I think we've all lived through those times when the natural resources, when oil and gas or mineral prices are doing well, communities do well. But then the reverse is also true. And a lot of times this situation is not contingent on factors that are locally controlled. They're happening outside of our regions, outside of our provinces, and even outside of our own countries. So we get used to these economic shocks. One of the other problems we often confront as local communities when we're dealing with natural resources and mega projects is the lack of local control over decision making. And Mark raised a very great point about how local is often seen as provincial and not municipal or not regional. And oftentimes we're dealing with multinational companies who might not be headquartered in this country. And what ends up happening is that when things are good, the profits go elsewhere. But when things are bad, the local labor force often gets laid off. And so there's a real kind of disconnect sometimes, and that's not in every situation, but sometimes, where the local communities are the ones that are feeling the pains the most. And then Mark also brought up the point about complacency, and that's a very good point that I think doesn't get talked about enough. When we are dealing with a boom time, we often get complacent, and we think that we can just ride what we have right now, and we don't think about what's going to happen, say 5 years, 10 years down the road, or even next year when the construction phase ends for Long Harbour, for example. How are we going to make that transition? In terms of some of the opportunities, I think everybody always emphasizes the jobs aspects of the opportunities that these mega projects bring. Hopefully, mega projects will also bring population growth to a region, but with increased commuting, that's not necessarily the case. Oftentimes, it brings more taxes, whether that be residential, industrial taxes, which are great for communities. They also might experience other economic spin-offs, so other companies coming to a region to take advantage of those mega projects to supply or service those mega projects. We also might see increased development and industrial growth as a result of that. And I think another really positive opportunity that we often kind of forget about is that companies are corporate citizens in their local communities. They do invest in a lot of infrastructure. They invest in schools. They invest in hospitals. Some of my favorite memories growing up in mining communities was the family days that the mines would host. And we'd all get to go out and play in the mines and see the mines and have events on the mine sites that were really celebrated. And so we forget that these big companies do play a role in our communities and invest in our communities, and that's a significant opportunity. So one of the things I was specifically asked to address was those questions around how citizens and communities can best take advantage of these opportunities and mitigate these challenges, as well as how they can prepare for that fall-off activity once the construction phase is over, and how communities can work with each other as well as industry to plan more sustainable economic development for their future. And then also, specifically in Newfoundland and Labrador, who plays this role now that the red bees are gone? So I wanted to start off with this slide, and it's a quote from an article by Keith Story and Lawrence Hamilton. And Keith Story is a well-known academic here in Newfoundland and Labrador who is a retired professor in the geography department. And for those of you who might not be able to see the writing, it says, by the time things reach the project level, it is too late to answer the biggest questions that are inevitably posed. And we're going to come back to this on my final slide and emphasize the importance of being proactive and thinking ahead. So in terms of some of the regional development approaches that we see in the literature to kind of capture some of the opportunities for mega projects, Mark talked a bit about regulations that provincial governments or federal governments can put in place that, say, require companies to process minerals or products within provincial boundaries. He also discussed impact benefit agreements and planning and socioeconomic agreements. Other regions and communities have looked at impact mitigation funds. So basically what that is these are funds that will support regional projects that help alleviate the socio and economic impacts on communities affected by mega projects, both during their planning, their construction, and their operation phases. Other communities and regions have implemented workforce initiatives, so that simply means legislation that requires a certain percentage of the workforce to be local. But I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about the last three: trusts and regional economic development funds, resource revenue sharing agreements, and regional economic alliances. So in terms of trusts and regional economic development funds, the three kind of most talked about examples in Canada are the Alberta Heritage Saving Trust Fund, and that's been around since 1976. And basically what the provincial government did in Alberta was collect a portion of the non-renewable resource revenue to save for the future and to help diversify the economy. So they've reinvested that money into things like healthcare, education, social services. In terms of Northern British Columbia and Northern Ontario, they both have access to specific regional development funds. Now, neither one is connected to resource revenues. These funds were set up by the provincial government in both provinces. But what they do is they focus specifically on economic diversification, and they're very targeted towards these regions that are naturally resource-based regions. And so in Northern Ontario, the Heritage Fund, it sits at about $100 million, and you can access funding for youth entrepreneurs in general, if you're expanding your business. And so these are available, very targeted to the region where the resources are coming from. In terms of resource revenue sharing, the most well-known and talked about example right now is the British Columbia Fair Share Agreement. And this is a multi-year agreement between the province in British Columbia and the Peace River Regional District. And basically what happens is the province redistributes a portion of provincial royalties from the oil and gas sector back to the municipalities in the region. So for example, Hudson Hope, which has about 1,000 people, receives over $500,000 per year. In Ontario, we have the provincial royalties from the aggregates resources, and again, a certain percentage of that goes back to municipalities every year. What I wanted to focus in on now are a few examples of the importance of acting regionally. And there are a lot of examples of regional economic alliances from across the country. Here in this region, there's the Eastern Suppliers Development Alliance, which is more of a business alliance, but we've also seen them in terms of municipalities and community organizations coming together to act collectively. And I have 3 slides with 3 quotes, and they're from my PhD research, which was looking at regional development in Northern Ontario. And when I asked one person in Northern Ontario why they've got to act regionally, they said, well, because the minute you're competing against each other, then you leave yourself open to be exploited economically by capital, and you leave yourself open to being exploited politically. I think beggaring our neighbors is not the solution to economic development. I think regional partnerships and working together, when one benefits, we all benefit. One example that's often cited in Northern Ontario is that the mayors from the 5 largest communities came together in the early 2000s. There was a mining downturn, there was a downturn in forestry, and they realized that their issues weren't being heard at Queen's Park. So they came together and they formed a loose coalition called the Northern Ontario Large Urban Mayors. And what they ended up doing was preparing a few working papers looking at northern issues and providing solutions to the provincial government. So they created the strategy, they created the plan, and they were presented to the government. And one of the successes that they had was getting a medical school in the region. And that was the first medical school to be opened in Canada in over 30 years, and only the 2nd medical school in North America during that same time period. And so when I was speaking to some of the people who were involved in that coalition and asked them why it was so important to come together, they said at the end of the day, we really have the same issues, the same problems, the same lack of budget, the same lack of respect. And we thought, wouldn't it be better? And if you took a pencil in your hand and you snapped it, it's easy. But if you put 5 pencils in your hand, you can't break that. And so it was that importance of coming together and speaking with one voice, which really gave them the power to move forward on some of the initiatives. And as a result, when I was talking to people involved in provincial policy making, one of the things that I heard over and over again is that when you have so many different communities in a region coming at you with different ideas, it's easy to ignore them. But, like this quote says, if you have one voice from a whole bunch of people, that's real power. And so it's that importance of kind of coming together, having a plan, having a strategy, and going and getting what you want. Before I turn to my final slide about the future research I'm going to be doing in this region, I wanted to leave you with some words of advice I provided in a policy brief for regional actors in Northern Ontario. Stop waiting for the government to solve regional problems. Regional organizations need to develop the agenda, lead the discussion, and put forward policy solutions or risk having decisions being made for the region. Be the facilitator of regional development. And what I mean by this is that we need to have the plan and the strategy on the ground in our regions. We need to define what we want. We need to be proactive, not reactive, to issues that are confronting our regions. And we need to be daring and think outside the box. Don't be afraid that the answer might be no. You never know, it might be yes. We need to be inclusive. So think of the multi-stakeholders that exist in your region. So not only municipalities, but the industries, the community groups, the social groups, education, healthcare. And if people aren't interested, or communities aren't interested in being part of a regional movement, that's okay. Let them be, but leave the door open for them to play a part later on. And one of the most important things with acting regionally is there needs to be a plan and there needs to be a champion or champions. There needs to be someone who can run with it at the end of the day and keep it on the radar. So in terms of some future research that I'm going to be doing in this region, I've received funding from the Faculty of Arts at Memorial University to look at a project studying employment-related geographic mobility. So basically, that's a fancy term for labor mobility or people who commute for work. And I'm going to be specifically looking at the mining and the mineral processing industries here in Northern Ontario, or here in Newfoundland and Labrador and in Northern Ontario. And this project will feed into a much larger national project that's just starting, and it's being led by Barbara Neese, who is in the Department of Sociology at Memorial University. And that larger project is called the On the Move Partnership. And for anyone who's interested, you can find more information about that online. There's a great website that they've got up and running. And the national project's called Employment-Related Geographic Mobility in the Canadian Context. There's researchers from across the country. It's a 7-year project looking at a variety of sectors, including oil and gas, mining, transportation, as well as a variety of case study regions from BC, Alberta, Ontario, and Newfoundland and Labrador. So if you are interested in being involved in that research, if you're a commuter yourself or know someone who commutes, or if you're involved in the mining or mineral processing industry and you want to talk about the impacts that labor mobility has, please feel free to contact me or get in touch with me today, and we can talk about your involvement in that research.
Well, thank you, everybody. I'm sorry I don't have the technology attributes to present as the other two presenters have. And by the way, speaking of them, I would like to compliment both of them on their delivery and particularly on their content. And although you might have realized I was jabbing at Mark speaking, everything he said about benefits is right, except they're probably regional. But I assure you, local. He says it's on the radar. I'm not too certain it is on the radar yet. But I'll give him the benefit of the doubt because he's exposed to it every day and probably seeing it. But I have yet to. Are you going to hit me? Oh. My mouth is not big enough. Anyway, having said that, I'm really appreciative of what they said. And actually, Mark reaffirmed my thinking and my observations. I was also particularly glad that Mike, in giving my fortes or whatever, that what I'm about to say comes from seeing, by being exposed, by experiencing local initiatives or lack of local initiatives in this regard. I went to Lab City in '62. I lived in a bunkhouse, and I watched Iron Ore Company of Canada invest large amounts of money into their community. There was nothing in the Labrador City community that was in want. The best education facilities, the best recreation facilities, the best of housing, although a shortage of it for a while. I was there 16 months without my family. The wife said, thank God, but it did the cooking. I lost weight there. Believe it or not, probably I should go back for another 16 months. And then I came to Long Harbour. I watched Urco Industries grow from zero. I'm in the occupational health and safety consulting business, and I prospered good enough to be a successful small businessman. Small being business, not me. And I've been involved in commuting. I have people working in the far north now, both in Boise's and in Shefferville, most recently with Tata Steel. So please, when I say what I say, it's because I observed these things, I've experienced them, I saw them, and for that I present that as my credibility if you think I'm a bit of a nut. I think the very first thing, I was troubled too on what I was going to talk about today. And actually I've been distracted by Mark and by this young lady. I didn't get your first name. Heather? I spoke to you on the phone the other day, I should know you. Heather and Mark in their comments, a bit provocative and got me away from what I had really focused in on. And when I was first invited, there's so much to say about this particular subject that we can't cover it here all in a day. I watched the group on social studies or social work here today, or social experiences, I should say. And they haven't got enough time to cover the issues. Not if they spent all day here, they wouldn't get them all covered. So it's with that kind of thinking that I'm going to say what I've got to say. The stakeholders today, the municipalities, the governments, the consultants, the business people, there's a lack of sensitivity to local issues. The things that matter on the ground, the things that matter in the neighborhood. We have enjoyed tremendous success. The monies that have flowed into the economy, the town of Placentia has benefited. We've spent, I don't know, $10 or $12 million, Margie, here? $10 or $12 million in the last 7 or 8 years on infrastructure. 80% of it came from the province. 80% of it came out of the benefits that are being accrued because of these mega projects. Mark spoke of what's happening in Labrador on local issues, and true, the mega projects at the moment are facing reality in Labrador, local issues, and more particularly with the Aboriginal groups. Now, I'm not knocking what they're getting or what they're saying, because all that they're saying is true, and all that they're getting, they deserve. But it seems like the stakeholders, the developer, and the governments, and whoever goes into Labrador, they are sensitive to the local issues, the local needs, what has to be done to cultivate the local. But that same sensitivity, I shouldn't say the same sensitivity, the same quality of sensitivity is not there when they come to Placentia. It is not there when they went to Long Harbour. It is not there in Arnold's. It is not on the Cape Shore. I won't speak of the rest of the problem because I don't know that much about it, or haven't been close to it. I speak of Hibernia. I was in cabinet when Hibernia was struck. I was on the committee of cabinet that got it off the ground and convinced the province to take up the 10% with the crowd down in the US. And I saw Wells and Crosby get together and make it happen. Make Hibernia happen. But Hibernia was in my district. And I went into the district and saw what it wasn't doing in the district, even when it started the construction. Great, all this jobs were being created. All this work was being done. There was no procurement locally. There was no labor hiring locally. I say that tongue-in-cheek. But everybody couldn't get a job that should have gotten a job. And nowhere was anybody sensitive to that issue. 3,000 workers in Long Harbour. But when that labor agreement, I'll get to that too, was signed and developed, and the SPO, Mark, SPO they call it, was put in vogue, nothing about locals. So what I'm saying is that while we've enjoyed a great deal of success on the big picture, I've had the good fortune to be good friends, and probably some of you say, no, unfortunately, be good friends of some of the greatest social leaders we had. Trudeau, Smallwood. In the end of their days, people turned on them because all they saw was the big picture. And the people who develop these projects today and the people who are involved in negotiations do not have the sensitivity to the local issues. They see the big picture. And all this money that's coming into the province will help the local communities. If the politicians deem you're going to get your capital grants or your capital works or their investment. But there's no direct consideration or investment or intent to invest of either cash or otherwise locally. The question arises, how are we going to keep the locals happy? How are we going to keep the natives happy? Into damage control more than anything. And I had the greatest insight into this in Long Harbour because I was there when it was developed. And I had great contact with the senior management. As a matter of fact, I worked directly for them. I worked directly for the corporate senior management and the Long Harbour senior management on safety and security and fire prevention, which is my forte. But I because of my political aspirations or my insights or whatever I got into, participation, I also did a lot of community liaison, for the want of a better word. But I was good friends with Frank Moores and these fellows, so I could go and talk to them on behalf of the company. So I saw the company's aspirations. I saw the aspirations of the senior executive, and they were forever considerate of what's happening. In Long Harbour, they were very concerned. Don't hire anybody unless they're from Long Harbour. Next, don't hire anybody unless they're from Dunville or the Placentia area. That was our first consideration. Or from Chapel Arm or Norman's Cove, all in the area there. What can we do in the schools? What can we do this? And probably there was a reaction to the bad rap that they developed or reputation they developed over their environmental mess that they created. But whatever the reaction was, they were into the community. I do not see that same sensitivity today in the others, in what's happening. So I'll leave that now and just talk a little bit about the labor agreement. Again, a lack of sensitivity to local issues. When the RDC and the SPO and all these things happened in Long Harbour, and I stand to be corrected on this, but I'm pretty well close to it. There was 40 people in Long Harbour that really needed work. 40 people. The rest were trades that were going to get jobs anyway, if maybe, but at least they could try and get into the unions and everything. But those 40 people could not get work. I'm disappointed Gary's not here today, Gary Keating. I said to Gary Keating, I said, you go put the gun to their head and tell them no work goes ahead over there unless these 40 go to work. No, they wouldn't think of it. I said to whoever it had to be said to, the unions and non-unions, listen, put those 40 people to work. They can't do a job, send them packing. But give them a chance at something. No, sir. If you weren't related to somebody, particularly in the unions, you didn't get a job. That SPO is a license for corruption in hiring practice. You cannot get a job with certain, now the trades, the real trades, but say the non-skilled trades, you cannot get a job unless you're a friend or related or in some way connected to a union rep. I'm telling you, I know. I was in, there was work went ahead down in Argentia. And it was a union site connected with the SPO. And I said, now fellas, you've got to give, and Harvey and Company were the managing agent in there, a managing company, we'll say, of the work that was going ahead. They had to hire through the union. And I asked, I said, boys, look, it's non-skilled labor. You're driving a truck, a forklift, labor, stevedoring, material handling. Big, heavy backs in this town. Hire them. And I went in there one day, and I forget who I had with me, but somebody was with me anyway, and I drove up on the airport where they had a lot of stuff laid down. And I drove along, and this fellow waved to me. And I said, geez, I don't know him. So I circled around, came back, and looking for news, and looked at him. He was a police officer from St. John's. Remember Royal New Playing Separate, as I thought. I said, what in the hell are you doing out here? He said, working. I said, that's obvious with the hard hat on and the vest and everything and like that. I said, I thought you were in a constabulary. Oh, he said, I retired a couple of weeks ago. I said, how'd you get a job out here? I said, you're not a union member? Oh, yeah, he said, I'm an associate member. I had a friend in the office in St. John's. And I said, I fell with you. I said, you're not old enough. I said, are you old enough to vote or drink? Well, I'm 18, sir. I said, how'd you get her? Well, my mother got a body. He was there. He was associate member. But I could not get an 18-year-old here job with all my drag and everything. Now, eventually, a good few people got a job in there. I know what a good few would be, but probably 10 or 15% of the workforce. But that's all. There was no consideration. But that would not happen in Labrador today. 70%? 70%, or a high percentage got to be Labradorians. And if not Aboriginal. I know, I hire them. I work there. I work within the benefits agreement. And I can't do it apart from casual relief, and a senior manager, all my employees in Boise are Labradorians. I just went into Shefferville. 50% of my employees are from Shefferville. Geez, some can't even speak English. But I'm living up to the agreement. But I'm required to have 70%. I just can't get them because they're not qualified. So I have 50% of my workforce there, mentoring and training the other 50% because of the benefits agreement. That benefits agreement don't pertain to Placentia, Long Harbour, Fairhaven, Little Harbour, Arnold's Cove, or anywhere else. It don't happen. It's the province. Skilled trades. Lady here spoke about skilled trades. They're meant to go getting work. And I read the news, and it drives me nuts to read the news and listen to them on television. And Mr. Kennedy, you're from Skills and Trades. The shortage of skills and trades in the province. Within 24 hours, the day that I read the article and saw it on CBC, and the next day, 3 electricians. 1 electrician plus an instrumentation tradesperson, which are in high demand in industry, instrumentation, could not get a job in Long Harbour because they worked in the union. And a lady dropped in the office there, paying her taxes, and I was going in, and she said, "Can I see you, Mr. Hogan, for a minute?" "Sure, come in." Her son-in-law was home. Electrician, home from Fort McMurray. Anything you can do to get him a job in Long Harbour? No. And he was in the union, but not far enough the ladder or connected well enough to get to Long Harbour. I don't want to sound totally negative, but I thought I would point out the pitfalls for those of you who have to analyze what has to happen in the local communities. And the benefits agreement. I challenged Mark there when he made about local benefits that we derived, and he turned around and said, "School." I was the mayor of Dunville when they built St. Anne's. Beautiful school, great staff. Anyway, they built the school, or they put out the tender, and the tender came in a couple of $1 million or whatever it was over the cost of building the school. So they chopped the 30 feet off the gymnasium, removed the cafeteria, and no music room. Met the cost of building a new school, so they built it. So in 2005, I sort of was challenged to run for council again, and I did, but the thing I had in my mind was stir up the pot on getting a new Laval. And it was barely on the radar then. So between battles with Derry King and Danny Williams, David Manning, and Mr. Collins, Felix Collins, and the staff can attest to my battles and my facetious, sarcastic, nasty emails to all of them and the school board. It eventually came about. But while it was going on, Inco, not Vale, but Inco were coming to town, and they were in here, and they were already in and going at the demonstration plant. But at that time, the plant was built in Argentia. And I had developed a pretty good rapport with the president and some of his advisors, close advisors. And they came for a visit to see what they could do in the area. Or what they wanted to do was talk about a grant move Texas. And I said, "But don't come. Don't want to talk about it." I said, "First of all," I said, "we're building a new school, and you've got to invest in it. Because if the tender comes in too high, they're going to cut the arse out of the gymnasium, or throw out the tech room, or the science room, or they're going to do something with it. They're not going to build the school that they should build." So my friend close to the president called me and said, "Listen, you're going to get $1 million for the school." I said, "Boy, not enough, not enough." And it got to come with a condition. It got to be on top of whatever the government's going to put in. So if the government is putting in 12 million, then yours got to be on top of that. Otherwise, it won't be given. Anyway, they came out, and as it happened, we opened a tender on the new fire hall that day, and it came in $200,000 over what we had budgeted cost. So here's another something else they're going to have to pay for. So they arrived, and we had a good discussion. They went to talk about it. I said, no, not until we get the school straightened away. And I said, there's another item, I said, cost that we've run into today. I said, we want to build a nice new fire hall. And I said, the budget is $2,000 short, $200,000 short. So anyway, I'm told I'm finished, but I'm not. He wants me to finish, he's going to throw me out till I get my points across. Anyway, to make a long story short, they came, they sat at the table, and it was going to be $1 million. I was hinted at. So the vice president he got up and he said, excuse me, can I use your phone? He went to his phone, he must have called his boss in Toronto. He came back to the table, he said, $2 million. And I said, plus the $200,000 for the fire station? He hemmed and hawed. And I guess he didn't want to go back to the phone again, so he said, listen, he said, you take $200,000 of the $2 million and put 1.8 into the school. I said, you got yourself a deal. Now, what do you want to talk about? That was how we got the benefits, sir. It wasn't out of no benefits agreement, I can tell you. When it comes to the benefit agreement, I have to ask the question, what input comes from what stakeholders? There's no input locally. There's a benefits agreement being negotiated as we speak with Husky to come to Argentia. And I've asked, but we're not included. Nobody's going to listen to Bill Hogan or our town manager or local people on what that benefits agreement should be for the town of Placentia. What are our needs of for the community? What do we need in Placentia? I listened to social group talk here just before we sat, and folks, I can tell you, multiply tenfold what you were talking about. And therein lies the intangible problems faced with in the community, not only in housing, but in everything. Has the developer been sat down along with the provincial government, and have they identified clearly what are the needs of the employer or the developer versus the needs of the community? How can we put them on one list? And then we take out the things that are missing and put them in. There's no true analysis. I asked the question today, I believe it was of Rod Greenwood. I said, is there a checklist anywhere that we could get that the province could tick off and say, that's done, the locals can tick off, that's done, or the developer can tick off, and that's done? There's not, I don't think. Good job for the Harris Centre. But it has to be done if there are any more mega projects. But I can tell you now that Husky are not coming to Argentia unless they have become sensitive to local issues. I've told them that when they came to us over a year ago now and said they'd be here last year, and the government has stifled that, whoever's talking them in there. But they've been told they have to have local, and they're not going to have an SPO. They're going to hire locally. They're going to buy locally. I've said to them, if you need a dozen pepper knobs and you only get 6 of them in Placentia, you buy the 6 in Placentia and you go wherever you want for the other 6. They said they will do it. Now, I don't know if they live up to it or not, but I got 3 or 4 months left in my term yet, and they'll do it in that 3 or 4 months, and they're meeting with us next Friday.
and I hope they'll have some indication of how they're going to conduct themselves. And I had one more thing, Rob, or a couple of things I have to hit on. For example, last night I listened to ExxonMobil, or was it the Hibernia Group, invest a pot full of money in the Ranger thing in Paradise. Great investment. Great thing to do. They're a very valuable asset to the community, and that's the kind of a thing that they need to be supporting. I hear every day about, I won't name them, but every Tom, Dick, and Harry big employer or investors or industry in the country are doing things. This, that memorial, and something else, all in the big picture. Hibernia, crowd bull arm now. I don't hear no announcement about a new fire hall or a new community centre in Fairhaven or Little Harbour. Nothing. They're going to give 200 million to the university. Fine. We need it. The university needs it. How about a small percentage point going into the local community where you are? They have to have a consideration of it. Let me assure you it's something. I read the week and set me off again, Rob. Just talking about the economy in St. John's or the industries that are coming to the province. It's creating a need for new infrastructure, new housing developments, new schools, new hotels, the expansion of the convention centre, 2 new big office buildings downtown, new retail, and on and on. Those kinds of things are happening. Those same industries are coming into rural Newfoundland. And they won't build a shit house. But they'll drive the economy to do these things. And we do not have the wherewithal that a big tax base like St. John's can to encourage this stuff. One more thing to read to you. Already this action has given rise to an awareness among the people of the community of the necessity of becoming involved in community affairs. As a result of their inquiries into the possible construction of oil rigs in this area, members of the association discovered that the companies involved had given no thought to the impact of such a boom in employment on the schools, the hospital, the service roads, the infrastructure, and so on. We have been heading for a repetition of the same drastic abuse of people that was written because of the resettlement program. That was written, don't think I'm on religious or anything now, Margie. This was presented to the faculty of the Department of Theology, the Oblate College of the Southwest in Dublin, Ireland, in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of a Master in Divinity by the Reverend James J. Doody, October 1981. Here we are, 30 years later, and the same thing is going on. Haven't changed. Those who should recognize and be sensitive to local issues are still not there. Anyway, I wore myself out.
Oh, we're not done with it yet. Well, I think that was a fantastic panel from industry, university, and community and government, Mr. Hogan, and all 3 of them speaking from life experience as well. So really powerful, and I think it's going to be a great resource. For the web, email in and we'll read them out. Or here in the room, put up your hand and I'll keep track and keep your questions. Responses from the panel. And you can introduce yourself. We'll get a mic to you so people on the web can hear.
Good afternoon. I'm Des Linehan and I'm with the Rural Secretariat. Myself and Mayor Hogan would always agree, but I think this is probably the first time in a long time that I back up and support what he says. And I might be getting on
Another
somebody
liberal
else's
too.
toes too about the environmental thing that I'm going to mention. There's nobody any more involved with the environment or love the environment than I do. But if you think about Long Harbour, there was more money spent on Sandy Pond in relocating X number of trout than there was spent in the municipality of Placentia to help the people, both young and old, who live here. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if there's any comment needed on that.
Sandy Pond wasn't the thriving fishing ground that everybody thought it was. I was disgusted when I heard they were going to excavate it and do what they were going to do with it. And I met, I won't name, I met him up on the road, and I know he's fishing every possible chance he gets. But he said, about goddamn time they got rid of that. It's nothing but a pool of dead water anyway. That was his reaction. He's an ardent fisherman. He didn't hear of it until I mentioned it to him. And speaking of that, for example, we have a pond that made the news recently in Argentia, and that's the name of it, the pond. The Americans came there in 1942, and the first thing they dumped in it was all the grease and oil that they had left over dumped into it. And they started killing that pond in 1942, and the stories I get, there's at least one tank in it, 2 stick body trucks, and a couple of forklifts. And I don't know how much. And if you go down there now, it's a beautiful looking pond, but it's dead water. And the government's held up the Husky project. I shouldn't say government. Environmental people held up the Husky project because they haven't done an analysis. And whatever environmental reports are on that pond, so they're saying, geez, that's gone, you know, and get on with the project. But that's got that project held up for months.
Other questions, comments? Yep, we'll get a mic to you so that we can hear it on the web. And you can introduce yourself.
Elaine Murray, Festival of Flags. To that point, regarding the situation with whether it be the fish in the pond near the new development in Long Harbour or the ponds in Argentia, I'd just like to make mention of the fact that if we're really serious about this being a people's issue, when we look back to 1941, there were 2 communities in Argentia and Marquise that were dislocated. The people were forced out in the middle of winter. That is the history of the place. The Festival of Flags has a beautiful visual arts exhibit, Argentia at War, which was last year dislocated from the Provincial Visitor Information Centre and now has not got a home. Whether it be fish in a pond or the history of a people who were dislocated some 60 years ago, I think it's extremely important that our community be aware of the fact that we are trying to relocate this exhibit to the Marine Atlantic Ferry Terminal so that people coming into the province can have their first view of what it is, the history of this community, how it began in 41 and how it evolved and where we are today, more than 60 years later, welcoming in new partners in our community, whether it be Husky Oil, you know, and we have to concern ourselves with all of these realities. And I just wanted to make that point.
Great, thank you. Again, if anyone on the panel wants to jump in at any time, feel free. Other questions in the room? Oh, we have one emailed in.
Barb Marshall asks on Twitter for Mark, is it a regulatory requirement to register a benefits plan for a part of every EA process?
It's a decision of the Department of Environment and Conservation with respect to each guidelines, but of late it has been they have consistently required a benefits plan. But as I say, that's of late. I think it was the provincial government catching up with the offshore oil related legislation.
Thank you, Barb, for emailing that in. Other questions on the web or in the room? Yep, we'll get the mic over to you there and you can introduce yourself.
I expect any day for bureaucrats to have you say 10 Hail Marys, even that to hold up a project.
I have a question for Heather, actually. When in your presentation you were talking and you gave some examples of heritage trusts and resource trusts that had been set up in other provinces in terms of economic development and the spin-offs from resources going back into the communities, into various sectors. Can you speak to that a little bit more in how, you know, how it's funded, and is it basically led by the provinces themselves, the provincial governments, or is it set up by large companies?
The two regional development funds in northern BC and northern Ontario, those ones are set up by the provincial government, so that comes from provincial revenue, not directly tied to any type of resource revenue. And I can speak to the Northern Ontario one. There is a board of directors that sits on the corporation who are appointed by the province for, I think it's a 2-year mandate. And then there are staff who review the applications that go forward to that fund. In terms of the fair share agreements, those ones are directly tied to the resource royalties, but it's not an additional tax burden on the companies. It's simply redistributing the royalties that would go to the province to the municipalities, a portion of that. So there are, if you want more information on the fair share one, I can send that to you from BC as well as the Ontario one.
Thank you very much.
I wonder if I can say something supplemental to that. I think we have learned a lot from Norway in terms of the attempt to leverage at the provincial level economic benefits from especially offshore oil activity. There are perhaps some things which we haven't been able to leverage. One of which is that Norway, like Alberta, has a heritage fund with actually a huge amount of money in it. I do not know that it is directed primarily to regional economic development, but it certainly is directed towards economic development. And essentially the strategy has been to use the oil monies from a non-renewable resource to make, my understanding is to essentially make Norway and Norwegian companies the second most important players in a number of other industries, such as aquaculture, for instance. So thinking strategically about economic diversification and sustainability on the basis of non-renewable resource revenues.
And there is research that Ryan Gibson, a PhD student in geography at Memorial, with some funding from the Harris Center, is doing on community foundations. And as governments, federal and provincial, not just here but across Canada, withdraw from support from community development organizations, it's happening in every province except Quebec, really. A little bit of interesting work happening in Northern Ontario now. There are interesting examples of communities working with philanthropists and working with companies to generate their own funds and try to invest in economic development opportunities or community development opportunities independent of government because the funds they used previously were not there. So Ryan's work will be doing more on as it comes out. Yes, John, right back in the corner there. Oh, sorry, and did you want to jump in, Bill?
I just wanted to say, God forbid I am defending the provincial government, but this provincial government has such a deficit, or Newfoundland has such a deficit of infrastructure, i.e. schools, municipal services, and so on. I know that some of the leaders were thinking along the lines of creating such funds, but I think they've had to pay that deficit first. And for example, Placentia, the 80% changing the formula for capital grants, for example, was one of the greatest things that any government ever did for municipalities. It let us go ahead in leaps and bounds. And otherwise, I think that there should be a fund. There was thoughts back 20 years ago to do that when I was there, of creating such a fund. But I would suggest that, and this crowd don't invest the rest of their money right, but they certainly address the infrastructure deficit. And that's probably where some of our investment fund money went.
And this will be our last question or comment. And you can introduce yourself, sir.
Thank you, Rob. Tom O'Keefe, I'm with the Placentia Area Historical Society. But this area made me think of something else, and that is classic example that everyone knows about. Once the government stopped its funding, the red boards had to close down. Now I'm wondering if the Harris Center could look at a possible project to look at and help community groups look at ways of raising funding through social enterprise, setting up business and so on. Sort of a classic example that comes from here is the recreational vehicle parking in Argentia, which was operated for a couple of years and I think all the time at a loss. Recently, the local development association took it over, found out new ways of handling it, and they ended up by making at least a small profit in the past couple of years. There are other groups here like that, the Festival of Flags, the lane representative, the Path groups that puts off plays on Castle Hill, and other groups here. And recently they've run across, not as obviously, but the same way, they could apply for these JCP grants and get help there, but all of a sudden they've been cut off, but not as deliberately or announced in the same way. They're still there, but try and get them, and certainly try and get them in the same way we did it previously, which meant that you could hire a coordinator, the same coordinator every year, to help run that program. But the rules have gotten so tight, especially since the province took it over, it's just ridiculous, so that all these are left short. So I'm saying again, is there a way that someone might look at these sort of social enterprises where the organization can take on something which makes a little money for them, but also does some good in the community as the RV park does for tourist trade?
Thank you, Tom. I think that's a great point, and something that a few of the rural development organizations over the years did before the Red Bees, or a lot of them did. And one of the Red Bees did, I know, out in the Carbonear area, and that's why they continued. But there's a lot of interest, as you know, in social enterprise now. Natalie Slowinski in the business school is doing some work now looking at the Shorefast Foundation in Fogo. And that's an exceptional one, but she's looking at lessons from that that can be applied elsewhere. But I think there's a lot of interest in that area. I don't know if anyone on the panel would want to jump in on that. Nope.
Just to make the comment that I think it was a very big mistake from a municipal point of view to discontinue the Red Board program. They had great value to give to the community, and were a great asset to the communities that one could turn to, but it's not there anymore for any other source.
Nope. And it's happening elsewhere in Atlantic Canada and in pretty much every province. So it's fascinating, the change across Canada. So here we are in Placentia working with this region.
It's called the Harper philosophy.
Oh, sorry, we have one on the web. Hate to miss it.
One more tweet from Barbara Marshall again, echoing Mr. Hogan's frustrations. She says, Mr. Hogan, Labrador Straits area is in the same boat as Placentia with regards to no sensitivity to local issues regarding the Labrador Island transmission link, and we had participant funding to engage in EA process. Very frustrating to say the least. So same across the province, she agrees.
Thank you, Barb. And of course, the benefit of webcasting these events is we have people like Barb in the Labrador Straits participating with us here today. Those of us in the room today are going to continue into workshops this afternoon as one of the Harris Center regional workshops, looking at how the university can partner with community groups, business, industry, local governments. For those of you on the web, we hope this has been useful for you. And we would really like everyone to do an evaluation for the session. If you're on the web, you can go to the box on the bottom of the web there, and just takes a couple of minutes. If you're here in the room, in your kits is a little evaluation card. Really important to get evaluation of this future sessions. I really want to thank all the organizing committee. Their names will all be listed on the credits for this session. Want to thank our presenters, Mark Shrimpton, Bill Hogan, and Heather Hall. I do have gifts I'll give them after I sign off, and can't thank them enough. For those of us lucky enough to be in the room, I think we should all express thanks to the caterers. Phillips Cafe did a fantastic job for lunch today. There are lots of great businesses and great restaurants in rural Newfoundland. And I can't thank you all for your active participation in the session. It's only by being an engaged democracy that we can make a difference. And you did it by showing up here and being on the web. And thanks again to the panel. Superb job. Thanks a lot, and see you in the workshop. Thank you, sir. Mr. Hogan, that was wonderful. Fantastic.